All right. So let me discuss about the few topics that on which I'm going to talk about today. And let me start with that one topic is the podcast. Nowadays, in every YouTube channel, the one thing that you can easily get to see is the podcast. Everyone who has a mic and they are becoming a podcaster, they arrange their show and they ask one guest to come over there and they start speaking about the one specific topic, and we call it a podcast. So earlier this trend was in the United States or the UK where people used to do the podcast thing, but suddenly the spike in the podcast is happening in the India as well. We can see the lot of YouTubers who started their own podcast and they are asking guests to come over there and they ask questions, and uh, we get the answers for them. So basically, if I talk about in a different perspective, so it's a good thing where we can get to know the lot of knowledge, and we get to know the things that are not publicly available, or the things that we want to know. No, because the person who is in the podcast are sometime like a good person, or sometime like the people who is hosting the podcast, they ask the person who is a celebrity or news anchor or the any famous personality to come to their podcast, and the question they ask are the very uh, those type of question which we also want to know as a public. But yes, there are few names that recently are in the top names who are in the Indian podcast list, like a beer bar chips and the Ranbir and the other, like even in the Hindi as well, there are a lot of podcasts which are going on. So if I share my perspective or my thoughts on the podcast, so it's a good source of learning where you can get to know the views of a person who is a guest, and the and from the person who is hosting the podcast. So there are two different personality and with the difference in their thoughts, and they are sharing their thoughts, and finally we get to know the different perspective. So this is what the best learning opportunity for us, and this is what like really entertaining sometime, because if we see a news and if we see any kind of debate, so what actually is happening, the three or four people who are in the TV screen are fighting with each other, and we are not getting any sense out of it. But in the podcast, what is the best thing is that like there is a so peaceful thing, and the two people are speaking in a very calm and composed manner, and there is a very clear speech and thinking. The answers that they give are very logical, yeah, except in a few cases where we receive the illogical answers. But yes, the most of the time like answers are logical and with a fact. And there are a couple of other things as well. The my reason, the why I used to see the podcast is because I want to learn some new words and new vocabulary, and I want to learn the communication in the way that how to convince someone with your own words and with your own thoughts. That is a very difficult thing nowadays for me, and it's a very challenging task. So I decided to listen to a podcasts and try to learn how the people used to convey their message, so that this person who is intercepting it can easily get to know what I am trying to say over there. The lot of difficulties has been faced by me due to the lack of communication skills. So I decided to not to be too harsh on anyone, but yes, I want to deliver my message in a very concise way, be it a written communication or through a oral communication. I want to be a very concise and a clear. That is a one more aspect of a job, the role that I am doing right now. And coming to the podcast again, I really like it. I really spend so much of my time by listening to them. And basically I love the podcast on which like there is something new or something interesting is there. I mostly like to watch a podcast where there is a self development, there is a money related business podcast. So these are my favorite podcasts which I used to listen a lot, and they are helping me out by learning a lot of vocabularies. Sometime I uh, live a life of the other person who is on the podcast, and that is what like I am doing right now.